There are stories that time has tried to erase. Stories that sleep beneath the surface of the world, waiting for the right moment to be remembered. This is one of them. Before men dreamed of love, before the sun itself learned to rise and fall, the gods already knew, disordered with it. Damnation. They say love is light, but love also has a dark side. A side that asks no permission, that takes what it wants, that drags the soul into the depths and makes it be reborn. In the shadows of the underworld, a solitary god watched the realm of the living. His name was Hades, lord of the dead, guardian of all that had been forgotten. Above, the daughter of spring danced Persephone, pure, radiant, innocent as the first light of dawn. When their destinies crossed, the universe split in two. Life and death looked into each other's eyes, and love was born where nothing was meant to bloom. This is not a story of good and evil. It is a story of balance, of what happens when light touches darkness and darkness learns to love. Today we shall descend together into the heart of shadows, where gods weep in silence and love carries the weight of 1,000 years. Embrace the cold, extinguish the lights, and listen. The legend of Hades and Persephone, the kingdom of shadows. Not all creation was born of light. Before the first ray of sun kissed the surface of the world, there was only silence, a dense, infinite sea where time still slept. From that silence, the ancient gods were born, shaped from what no mortal could ever comprehend. The essence of chaos, and among these gods, 3 brothers rose to divide the universe. Zeus, the thunder, Poseidon, the ocean, and Hades, the abyss. To the eyes of men, the name of Hades has always been a synonym for fear. But in truth, he was more than the Lord of Death. He was the guardian of balance. While Zeus ruled the sky and Poseidon ruled the sea, Hades was condemned to the realm of the dead, the region beneath all others, where light cannot reach and sound fades into memory. There, in the heart of the earth, he built his throne, made of obsidian and silence. The underworld was not the hell that many imagine. It was vast, divided into regions. The asphodel fields, where ordinary souls wandered. The Erebus, where nothingness itself breathed. Tartarus, prison of the titans and forgotten monsters. And farther still, the Elysian fields, the refuge of the righteous, where the few who had lived with virtue rested in light. Hades ruled over it all with a firm hand and an unshaken heart. But beneath his stern appearance, there was solitude, for the Lord of Darkness had no one to love him. The gods of Olympus rarely spoke his name. To them, Hades was a reminder that even immortals had limits. While Zeus's banquets filled the heavens with laughter, Hades' throne remained empty, and in the eternal nights of the underworld, the only sound that echoed was the whisper of souls. For centuries, Hades reigned in silence. He watched the dead arrive and depart, judged them with fairness, and delivered them to the fates they deserved. There was no mercy, but there was no cruelty either. Only balance, for even death, in Hades' eyes, was merely one face of order. But that balance had a price. Isolation. And it was the void itself that shaped him. His voice became slow, his emotions cold, and his gaze distant. Until one day, something broke the eternity of his silence. From the underworld, Hades watched the world of the living through the rivers that surrounded his realm. In their waters, sometimes reflections from the surface appeared: sunlight, birdsong, flowers, and fields. And among these reflections, one day, he saw her, Persephone, the daughter of Demeter, the lady of the harvest, the goddess of the seasons. She walked through golden fields as if dancing with the wind. Her hands touched the flowers, and they bloomed in reverence. Her laughter made the air vibrate, and the earth beneath her feet grew fertile. She was spring itself, in divine form. Hades stood still, as if time had stopped. Nothing in the underworld could compare to that vision. She was pure light, and he, the Lord of Shadow. But the greater the contrast, the stronger the attraction. What is born of night will always be drawn to the dawn. 4 days, Hades watched her in secret. Every gesture fascinated him. The way she gathered flowers, the brightness in her eyes when she spoke to the nymphs, the innocence that time had not yet corrupted. And the more he watched her, the deeper the abyss within him grew. For something new was being born there. Something even the god of death could not control. Desire. But the desire of gods is dangerous. It is not human. It knows no limits. And for Hades, love was not a gift. It was a risk. Because nothing born of light can survive in the dark. Even so, the seed was planted, and the underworld, long accustomed to silence, began to pulse with something new. Something alive. On the surface, Demeter watched her daughter with pride. Persephone was her most precious treasure, the hope that ensured the world would never stop blooming. But the gods know, the more beautiful the flower, the sooner it will be coveted, and fate, invisible, had already drawn its path. It was on a day of sunlight that the world began to change, the garden of spring and the meeting of fates. The day rose serene over the land of mortals. The air was sweet, and the scent of flowers mingled with the laughter of nymphs who danced around Persephone. The young goddess ran through fields of lilies and daffodils, gathering blossoms that seemed to bow before her, as if nature itself recognized her as its queen. The winds played in her golden hair, and the sun touched her face with an almost divine glow. No mortal or immortal gaze could remain indifferent before such purity. She was life in the form of a song, and above her, unseen, fate watched. Patient, silent, inevitable. While the nymphs gathered flowers, Persephone spoke of the world. She dreamed of seeing Poseidon's sea, Zeus's clouds, and even the twilight that Hermes crossed in his journeys. But there was one place she feared. The underworld. Her mother, Demeter, spoke of it with a cold and somber voice. The realm where all things end. The dominion of a god no one dared to visit. Persephone imagined Hades as a faceless specter, cloaked in darkness and surrounded by tormented souls. Little did she know that the gaze of that very god already rested upon her, fascinated, silent, hungry for light, and deep within the earth. Hades watched her, not as a predator, but as a man who contemplates something he knows he can never possess. Love, to him, was a distant echo, a memory from a time he had never lived. But that day, as he saw Persephone kneel to pick a daffodil, something broke within him, a sound unheard, like the cracking of ancient ice. It was the sound of the underworld's heart shattering, and with it, the shadows began to move. High upon Olympus, Zeus saw what was happening. Nothing escapes the eyes of the Lord of Thunder. He knew the weight of Hades' solitude, and the fragility of his daughter Demeter's heart. He understood that something terrible and beautiful was about to be born. But the gods are, above all, spectators of their own drama, and Zeus, curious, did not intervene. He allowed fate to follow its course, as one might watch a flame slowly consume a veil of silk. And so, the moment arrived. Persephone moved away from the nymphs, drawn to something that glimmered among the stones. It was a flower unlike any other, a black bloom, with deep, translucent petals that pulsed as though alive. She knelt, entranced, reached out her hand, and when her fingers touched the flower, the earth trembled. A thunderous sound echoed through the valleys. The roots twisted. The air grew dense, heavy, almost liquid. The nymphs screamed, calling her name, but Persephone could not hear them. The ground beneath her feet split open, and from within the chasm rose the chariot of Hades, forged of dark iron, drawn by horses of fire whose eyes burned like embers. The wind howled, and the light of day bent before the god's presence. Hades rose amid the smoke imposing. Silent, his gaze met Persephone's, and in that instant, time unraveled. She saw in him not the monster she had imagined, but eyes so ancient and deep they seemed to contain all the secrets of the universe. And Hades saw in her the reflection of the life he had never known. The contrast was absolute darkness and light, ending and beginning, and fate, smiling from the shadows, sealed their meeting. Without a word, Hades extended his hand. Persephone wanted to step back, but the ground still trembled, and fear held her still. In a swift motion, the god wrapped her in his cloak and carried her into the depths. The chariot plunged into the abyss, and the earth closed behind them. The sound of the sun vanished. Spring, in a single breath, was torn from the world. The nymphs ran frantically across the fields, crying the goddess's name. Far away, Demeter felt her daughter's absence like a blade cutting through her chest, and thus began the lament that would make the world tremble. In the depths below, the chariot crossed the rivers of death. The path to the underworld was made of echoes and mist. Persephone, stunned, watched the stone walls veiled in shadow and the faces of souls who whispered the god's name in reverence. She tried to understand what was happening, but fear was too great. Hades remained silent. There was no triumph in his gaze, only something resembling sorrow. An ancient shadow even he could not name. At last, the chariot stopped before a colossal gate, guarded by Cerberus, the three-headed hound. Flames reflected in the creature's eyes as it bowed before its master. Hades led Persephone along the stone path, beneath a ceiling of rock that glowed with pale lights. The underworld unfolded before her, vast, silent, terrifying, and magnificent. It was a realm of order and death, yet there was beauty in it too, a beauty born of stillness and eternity. Hades led her to his throne and spoke for the first time. "Do not fear, daughter of spring. Here, nothing shall harm you. No mortal, no spirit shall dare wound you under my gaze. You are my guest, and if fate allows, my queen." His voice echoed through the caverns like thunder held back. Persephone did not answer. Her eyes were wet, but her stance was steady. She did not cry. She did not scream. She simply stood there, wrapped in darkness, trying to understand what fate had made of her. In the days that followed, the underworld changed. The flames grew softer, the silence lighter. The souls seemed to move more gently, as though something sacred had descended upon the realm of the dead. And Hades, for the first time in ages, felt something close to peace. But in the world above, Demeter awoke in fury, and the earth began to wither.
The wrath of Demeter and the silence of the gods. The moment Persephone vanished beneath the earth, a scream tore through the heavens. Demeter, goddess of the harvest, felt her daughter's absence, as though the heart of the world had stopped beating. Her gaze, once tender and serene, became the gaze of a storm. She abandoned Olympus and wandered among mortals disguised as an old woman, searching for traces, listening to rumors, questioning rivers and mountains. But no one knew where Persephone had been taken. The wind carried only the distant echo of a dark chariot and the scent of burning iron. For 9 days and 9 nights, Demeter roamed the world, without eating, without sleep, without rest. The dew dried up, the soil began to crack. The seeds that slept in the earth refused to sprout. The flowers closed as if sharing the goddess's mourning. Men looked to the sky in despair. Their crops were dying and hunger spread across the land. On the 10th day, a winged figure descended before her. Hermes, the messenger of Zeus, the god of swift words, landed in her path. His voice sounded like the fluttering of unseen wings. "Lady of the fields," he said, "your sorrow shakes the very foundations of Olympus. The world begins to die with you. Tell me what you seek." Demeter raised her terrident eyes and answered, "My daughter, the light I have lost, the laughter that once made the wind sing." Hermes lowered his gaze. He knew the truth, but the orders of Zeus were clear. The time for revelation had not yet come. And so he turned away in silence, while Demeter's weeping echoed through the mountains like the roar of a tempest. The gods began to fear. Without Demeter, the earth produced nothing. The altars grew cold, men ceased their offerings, and the smoke of temples faded. From his high throne, Zeus watched, troubled. He knew the cause of the tragedy slept beneath the earth, and that the culprit was his own brother. In the underworld, Hades saw the reflections of suffering on the surface through the waters of the Styx. He saw mortals wasting away, harvests rotting, and felt Demeter's grief, though he could not hear her. Persephone remained by his side, silent. She did not try to flee, but she did not smile either. Hades watched her with quiet reverence. She carried a fragment of light into his world, and he knew that if he lost her, the underworld would once again become a desert of echoes. Time there had no measure. Persephone began to walk through the halls of the underworld. Curious, despite her fear, she discovered gardens made of glowing stones, silver lakes where souls reflected in silence. Trees whose branches bore fruits of shadow. Nothing was alive, yet everything seemed to pulse in another way. Beneath this stillness, she began to feel something unexpected: calm. The terror faded into curiosity, and curiosity into compassion. The god who had taken her was not the monster she had imagined. There was sorrow in Hades's gestures, a kind of solitude Persephone recognized, for even light feels lonely when it shines too brightly. Demeter, on the other hand, was changing. The goddess of fertility had become the goddess of winter. The ground where she stepped turned grey. The wind grew cold. The rivers lost their sparkle, the trees their leaves. Mortals prayed for mercy, but she did not listen. Her only answer was silence. The world had become a reflection of a mother's grief. Zeus finally summoned Helios, the sun god, and forced him to reveal what he had seen. Helios told what his eyes had witnessed: the abduction, the black chariot, the plunge into the abyss. The name of Hades echoed among the gods like contained thunder. Demeter rose, consumed by divine fury, and marched to Olympus. Before Zeus, her voice was no longer sweet, it was a roar. "You gave my daughter to the Lord of Death. While she remains in the underworld, nothing on earth shall live. I will turn the world into a tomb if I must." Zeus tried to speak, but she would not listen. The sun dimmed for an instant, the stars hid, and ice covered the valleys of men. In the depths, Hades felt the cold penetrate his realm. Even the flames of Tartarus burned weaker. The underworld and the earth were bound, and Demeter's despair began to unravel the balance of all things. Yet Hades did not repent. Love to him was an inevitable force as ancient as death itself, and for the first time he wished for something to bloom within his dominion. Persephone wandered through the garden of stones. The silence there had its own kind of music. Amid pale flowers, she found a lake of still waters. When she looked at her reflection, she realized she was no longer the same. Her skin carried the glow of the moon, and her eyes bore a faint trace of shadow. She belonged to both the surface and the dark, and that duality was becoming her essence. Hades approached slowly. His presence was dense yet calm. He spoke little, as if afraid to shatter an enchantment. The world above calls to you, Persephone, but here you are more than the daughter of the harvest. You are the lady of life and death. Your will can make the underworld bloom. Persephone looked at him in silence. His tone was not one of command, but of plea, and in his eyes she saw something she had never seen in any god before: vulnerability. Thus the first bond between them was formed, not through power, but through compassion. At last Zeus saw that nothing would prosper if the world continued to wither. He summoned Hermes and ordered him to descend into the underworld. The message was simple: Demeter's daughter must return, or the earth would perish. Hermes flew through layers of shadow, crossing the rivers that guard the threshold between the living and the dead, until he reached the throne of Hades. The god of death received him calmly. He listened to Zeus's decree, yet his gaze never left Persephone. Fate was calling her once more, and he knew that if she left, the underworld would fall silent again. When Persephone heard Hermes' words, something inside her broke in two. She longed to see her mother, to feel the warmth of the sun, to hear the winds of the surface. But part of her already belonged to the darkness. She loved what she had found there: the balance, the silence, and perhaps Hades himself. The fruit of the underworld and the eternal accord. Hades led her to the central garden of his palace. There, a single living tree grew, nourished by the waters of the river Lethe. From its branches hung pomegranates, fruits red as the blood of gods. He plucked one and offered it to the young goddess. "If you wish to leave, you may go," said Hades, "but take with you something of my realm, so that you never forget what you have found here." Persephone looked at the fruit. Its fragrance was sweet, enchanting. Without knowing, she brought 6 seeds to her lips. The moment she swallowed them, fate was sealed. She would belong forever to 2 worlds, half to the light, half to the shadows. When Hermes guided her back to the surface, the world exhaled a sigh. Demeter ran to meet her daughter, embracing her with tears. Flowers bloomed anew, the ice melted, and the fields breathed once more. But Zeus knew that balance demanded a price. He summoned mother and daughter and spoke the decree for having tasted the food of the underworld. Persephone would spend half the cycle beside Hades and the other half with Demeter. Thus, the seasons were born. When Persephone rises, the earth blossoms and summer awakens. When she descends, the world is cloaked in cold, and the shadows grow long. Every winter is Demeter's lament. Every spring, their reunion. And in the underworld, Hades waits not as a jailer, but as a patient lover. When the leaves fall and the winds begin to change, Persephone returns, carrying with her the memory of life. He welcomes her in silence, and the underworld blooms once more with flowers that belong neither to the light nor to the dark. The eternal cycle. as the ages passed, mortals forgot that this love was what held the balance of the world together. They called Hades cruel and Persephone a prisoner. But the ancient poets knew the truth. Their love is the bond between birth and death, between beginning and end. It is the heartbeat of time itself. Without descent, there would be no rebirth. Without winter, no spring. When the cold winds blow and the earth falls silent, it is the moment she returns to the shadows and the underworld fills with a pale light. Hades watches her walk among the dead, her dark veil trailing behind her like the night. She touches the lost souls, and for a fleeting moment they remember the warmth of life. And when Persephone smiles, even the abyss seems to breathe, so they remain king and queen of two worlds. No mortal will ever fully understand this love, for it is woven of contradiction, of beauty and sorrow. Yet it is within that contradiction that the universe endures.